Kia murata ngekizio ya doke bhaya malema we bhaya malema komanda EFF tanda
Aye moye tapili Aye moye tapili
na Kipulani Adelina Pansi ke tswalwa Masakeng Kliptown 1949 ka di 12 sa February 1957 ntwa ko hae ya tswa phiri ke ngwana yo a hotseng lelapeng la politiki ke ile ka politika mo Lephiri ka politika ke ne ke matha Orlando ka style wa mehleng ya pele re ne re sa buitsa ba sa rona jolo ka bana ba ona jwale o no chataire re ne re kopanela kerekeng ela Regina Mondi le bo Winnie Bosiu wa tshwanela go jwale ka 19 ka balela Lesotho le moshimane o mongwe wa ragadi wa ka le next door ya kwa bona ka 76 go no go le hobe ka tshwanela gore jwale mme wa ka o ne a sa pile sela South Africa ba ile family ntate a tloka itse ka mme dula pass a dula ka bereka General Hospital ka bereka All Gold CIC General Hospital Joburg ne beke ke bereka dipemena ba te o lo bima na kwa ngwa ke ntse ke re ke a tsama ke bone maburu a fitla ka tame hape go ke tlowe go dula Muzimhlope hostel ya basadi ka 76 mbe ke le pregnant ka tame o be ke tswe hostel go thwe ke tlisa politiki ka mo ka gore ne ke tsoa ke tshela ka maoto ke ya Orlando a ke re la bona ke o tsamaya ka maoto go ya ha Mewini ne ke ya Mewini ke fihle ka nako eno ha o no sa sebetse ne le tlala re fitla ke je re kopane le bo Mewini re bona ne o be monate ke khutle ke tla hae ke tle mo ke dulang hostel wa tshwanela hore ke bona hore ke batla nthola maburu ka tloa ka tlo batla pleke ka mo ka mining wa bottom ka batla pleke mosebetsi wa o hlaola masimong and then ba nkuka ba mpea shopong ka sebetsa mara mosadi o wa Letadiana re ngonyana o clever o Adelina a bua le yena sefatlo sege ha tshware ke motho wa politiki motho bana ba ba hana taba ya mrata ke dutse ne ke tloga mono ba nkuka ke ya Lesotho le bona ke lo ba hirela dikela kere ka gore nane ke tswa ZA yela gale ntse le teng ka ntlo ya ka nna ke ba hirela ba tla ba fitla ba hlaola ke ipatile ka tshwarwa ka o kwalwa o seneria ke tshwarelwa hore ke trespassa ke tswa Soweto ke tlo dula mo a re 90 ranta 90 days ka ba ngwana ko ha ya ntlhatlamang o na bereka mo ba mpatalla mare ba shanyana bana ba mpolella ba re hai re a tsamaya Adelina ka gale ya kae ba re ga tloa polasi ya fela ke be ke na le ntate motho ntate Mokwena ampolela re ke do bula pleke ya Swanapuri ke tla o bolella o thothe ampolela ka balela hona mo re le ngwana teng e ne le tering ka fitla ka dula teng a tla ndata re pleke e lokile a Swanaville ka neta nthutela ka ditonki tsa hae ka hloma mkhukhu ne re tsamaya ka maoto o tloa Swanaville mola re ya Kagiso go fitlela gore jwale ke a tshwarwa ka tshwarwa ka 1989 ba nlokolla ka 90 ba ntshwara ka o dula tronkong ba totosela nombola le uhuru ka tswa ne re tsoko re di 3 ba nchapile ne ke asa se di dikela ho le mosego no le monate ha le etsa tje re palama bene re isiwa John Poster number 4 e ka mole sa le number 4 e kwalla ba re kuka ba nkisa letamong ba nkwaletse ka ga zipi ba re ke bua gona dithunya tsa ANC di kae a nka ba ka bua ka re nna ke a fihla ke tswa Lesotho ke tlile ka kontraka ke tlo sebetsa a ke tsebe next ke la ka tswa I'm sure ke tsile 3 days inkata ya kena mo ke dula inkata ha ikena ka tshwanela hore ke eme ke se ka bale ya mehleng ya pele o no sa bale ha inkata kena kere o no yema wa mabudu ana utswa ditoko if you leader and chairperson for ANC mo ka matha ka fitla ka emela bonong bola ba fitla ba nthola di ditoko a ka ba gona utswa ditoko re thuse ke Azatili batho ba balela Azatili ka dula di ditoko tsa tlokukwa ke kolo ya moshara jona le mmereko ka ke le mo batho ba balehile ntate mara ke le boss biti saka ka pata batho ba Azatili motho a fihla pele ha ke le Azatili ke ntate Sesulu a fihla pele ha fihla ba mmontsha nna a tla o nagana ho etsahetseng ka mo hlalosetsa mara ke katile batho ba katile ke sa batle ba tswe ke sa batle ba tlale ha latela mme o ine ka dikolo ampata a ka ba ka thola next batho ba ne bo thoma khosa ba dikuka ka fela ba ka di bateng ba etsang mara ke re ho lokile ha ba ja ke ntate ka pata ka etsa dilo tsohle se ile sa nkutlwisa bohloko se buang ha re tsebe tšhelete ena ne re pata ka yona ne tswa ka ne re utlwa fela ho twe ho na le ditšhelete tse tileng tse mphaletseng goba nna bafu ba ka ba patuwe ka masapo le papa ho no na le dibaka tse ne di re phalela gore re tlo etsa funeral le ho etsetsa batho nombola le hudu ke bona ba tseba re qetile ho pata jwale ka tlameha ho matha khoto ya inkata ba ile ba ikgogela morao ke ile ka matha le ba matha le setjhaba ka qeta batho ka re ba kgutlele ba yo ha re qeta ho pata batho ha qeta ho pata batho ke ntse ke na le video bozi wa ipata ha batle ke bone mara wa e rekisa ha o rekisetsa ha batle ke tsebe o be rekisa video ya ka ntle le ho nna ke ditokelo tsaka tsa video ya ka ha ke tsebe till today bozi a votelwa azange ka pheta ha o tla di election ke vote Ntate Mandela hantle itse ha re ntse re qeta ho vouta nombola le hudu ba tla le bozi le mofu Eriki le Thandi Mohobo ba re ke tsona di councilor tsa lona tse ka re au a re e ka re ke a leboa nye wena uhuru ka di councilor tse o di tliseng di sa voutelo ba tla se ba senya history ya rona o ile jwalo ntate ha nka ba ka hlotse ke ba motho ha nka ba ka hlotse ke tsejwa ANC bozi a rena a ka se etse ke Mosotho a ka se leadwe ke Mosotho ke lwanetse ANC ke lenetse ha le bona ke go tsento tse ne ke sa tsebe hore nako mabulo a nandla a ndemešitse mahlo ne ke sa tsebe hore di-kitchen saka di senyehile ya ba jwale ke tingwa mosebetsi le bana ba ka ba tingwa mosebetsi ke a gwakua o lokile he la ka nna ka sheba e nngwe tse ding di-party mpa ka bona gore ke corruption fela ka tswa until ke be ke tsamaya kilo ka utlwa wa ile seng hore CIC o tla go Gauteng case nya batho ba lena sia ka mothola ka bala kaya ke tsama ke le mo a ke fitla ka reka di chips ka dula mo ka mo emelele ke go le tuku isa hla ka krea batho ba lena sia le ba kae ba yemi ba go a tlabana mona so apare barete una so bile rikalia ka itsa tala nyolo gapela a ema ka khumama ka pela bona ne ba le 3 ka ema ka pela malema ba di camera ba di pota ka ga gale ko batla le ha ntso sotla o tshwarwa o etswang ba wotla ma ANC ko rata o le jwalo ke batla ke tlo I recruiter wena ikisitse brand panteng a mplela re brand panteng ka re kae jole le yana o na tatetse o kena ka khoto o na dutse jele yana mo ne re na le batho ba ithuka re wena mpha di-form ke lo recruitela a go tla loka mama ka re ke lo recruitela ke ya kwa mogale ke tlatla le EFF e phela ke dula sana bile ka tsoa tsatsile le motho ya mo he ke mo he ka batla ofisi tsa ka ba ka di thola nkgatlile EFF ba ngwanenwa o bereketse ANC empa o sotleile jolo ka nna wa kwallwa o etsa ntho tse ka fela tse lefatsheng ka bona go tla tisetsa ke tshwanetse gore ke wele ka tsona hae ke ile ka recruiter ke ile ka di ba pumana ba re ke tlatse pomo ka ba bontsha ba re motho o moholo re kala bona motho o moholo a tshwana le wena ka ya mo ka nka di pomo ka recruiter ke motho a se ke rene ke tsa recycle haka ke topa di botlolo ne ke dula fase ke reka kota ke recruiter ba te le tlonolo le ke denga thola ntse ke le party agent ya EFF ne re sa qala batho ba balea mare le tlonolo le re kile ka le thola mo di nyetse tsene ne di difo ine le di dirile ile thutuzekane ile khululela kane ile ka skangeng ka mo ne di difo bathi modimo ile a nthusa mo ke ne ke tswa ka 500 ke di one ya ga ha re qeta ka hlajwa ke dipolisi ka tsama ha ke khutla ka pumana o tua Ntina o na le teng ne ke sa mosebele Ntina ba o re batho ba launche ka be ke ya kwa nna mosebetsi wa EFF ke ya go rata ntate le bana ba teng na jwale ke ya kula ba supporta ba matha ke di dipetlele ba tseba ke ka hona ile ga hantwa ka inela ka be ke tsama ke do reporta ka hantwa ka yanela ba ilukise go ba nga ba ka thola RDP hanga ba ka thola fela ke berekile ke rata EFF ibile e tlompata impatetse ngwana jwale le nna ke batla impata ne re sa tsebe go bozuma ba utswa ditšhelete ne re sa tsebe gore nyeo Mandela le yena utswitse ne re sa di tsebe ntho tseno ka pela ba go wa kana ka re neba ha wa kana o bua nnete ke le nna ke bua mona boezi utswa tšhelete le cabinet ya hae ka go bua nnete ne re sa tsebe niti ke ya ihlahetse tsatsine o shwa batho ka baka la motho a le iwane anke ke nka aswa mona ke ba bolelle la motho a ka bankwa tseke ya molela ke nna ha ke a joinisa ko wena EFF ke kisitse diphiri tsohle di nsitswe ke yela ke hopolane ke lo lwana mane legislature ha o lwana nge legislature ne ke le teng ke betswa ka di bulete mona a dutse nna ke le teng bana baka ha lwana legislature rile legislature ne ke ile EFF ya se ya bana EFF ke ya motho o molomong ya ratang motho a nanang hore EFF ke ya bana wa lora hobaneng ha ke re le ANC ila na joiniwa ke maqheku so on a re EFF ke ya bana re kene re le maqheku mo ANC a re EFF ke ya bana ke ba bolela mhlana ke re le mamenemene se re ke ya bana because le sa batle ho lahla skipa sa mcholozi ka le tlaloka le tla phushwa ke ngwana wa tla o tseleng ngwana o tla le rula ngwana o tla le busa ke le sa sila bomme ene nna ke le Mathabang ke le Pulane goba mo ba mpisa ka ngwana ba ga Mathabang ke le Pulane ke eletsa go CIC le gona ka se Women's League re tloela go kopana le banna re tloela go banana bana ba hatise banna hodimo ba itse boithatelo ba rona bomme ba EFF re bophe dikobo thekeng ke ne ke ba tshepisi ba mputsa banana bana ba rena mme Mathabang ha e sa jwe CIC hore re batla Women's League ka re ke tla molella ka bona ka fumana sebaka ke batla re be le Women's League ona ke na re kgone ho bua hoba ma ANC ba ga hatisa bontate hodimo ba bola bana ba bola basadi re be le lentswe EFF la bua re be le lentswe fela la bua hore mangwana o tshwara thipa ka bohaleng re be bomme re se ke ba bomme ba dipoto le ho tsejwa serateng re tsejwe setjhabeng ke hopola bashimane ba neng ba tshwerwe nako e bonye mona bona so bashimane ba kwa e bo thembisa kwa ba go nna ba re ne Mathabang o tswa matha 60 kilo ha o fitla wa tola wa tsama ya khoto ka re ntwa o e rata ha o khathali khoto na ile ba phela ke ntse ke tsama ha ona match ke tsama o ba petse ka nako ya hao ba nna ke tswa ke apere rikali ya ka le tserena ka ama ANC ya la motse ka petrol box ka wa tswa ke tla bola ka be ke bea
Thank you very much, fellow fighters, officials of the EFF, members of the War Council, Central Command Team, Provincial Command Teams, Regional Command Teams, Branch Command Teams, the ground forces of our glorious movement, the economic freedom fighters, fellow South Africans. Fellow fighters, today we commemorate the 9th of August, as the day where the women of South Africa took a brave stand against the apartheid regime, which sought to dictate to them where they can exist in their own land. On this day, brave women took to the streets in 1956 and gathered in their thousands at the Union Building, demanding the abolishment of past laws that segregated black people to apartheid reserves. Led by the likes of Lillian Ngoyi, Helen Joseph, the women of 1956 said they were tired of the apartheid regime, which broke black families and subjected them to massive unemployment through policies of segregation and restriction of movement. It was this generation of women that destroyed the idea that politics were designed for men and shook the brutal apartheid establishment with babies on their backs in Pretoria. These Pan-Africanist women understood that there was no freedom while a white minority dictated to African women where they could be and at what time. They stood, when it was not fashionable to do so, against a regime of terror, armed with their solidarity, and resolved that they were not kitchen girls and garden maids, but revolutionaries in their own rights. The significance of Women's Day is therefore a celebration of a generation of women who fought for the emancipation of African people and primarily the right to be free in their own land. It is a day that should be observed as a day of defiance and should inspire all of us to fight against injustice even when we are expected to succumb to the status quo. Fellow fighters, the significance of Women's Day lies not in referring to the women of our country as people who need our protection, but in understanding that women have the capacity to organize militant action and defeat racism, sexism, and gender-based discrimination. Women remain the beacon of hope for our society in the same way they were for the anti-apartheid activists. It was the women of this country who raised activists and sustained the black community in times of great hardship. When apartheid broke the men of this country, it was women who led the charge and kept the fires burning in the face of intimidation and death. It was women like Charlotte Maxeke, Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela, and many others who were fierce mobilizers in our communities, calling for the return of the land and the release of political prisoners. It is in the homes of women where men found safety and sanctuary, and it is upon the shoulders of women that our liberation project stands. We salute this generation, which understood that the liberation of women meant the liberation of all Africans. It is this women who inspire the defiant women of Xolobeni, who defend their land in the Eastern Cape against greedy mining interests and the puppet regime which undermines them and sells their wealth to the highest bidder. The women of Marikana, who are the products of the 1956 generation, kept the revolution alive behind the scenes and picked up the spear after their husbands, sons and brothers were slain by white monopoly capital. It is because of these women that we are today able to recognize the scars of our mothers who have undergone brutality but have been able to give South Africa a future. Fellow combatants, the conditions of women in South Africa have sadly remained harshly and unbearable. The 1994 dispensation has brought many constitutional rights which are supposed to protect women and uplift them. Yet these rights have not translated into reality. 65 years since the past march to the Union buildings, the women of South Africa live under a dark cloud of fear, abuse, economic, and social exclusion. Women in South Africa are subjected to dehumanizing condition, and the very structure of our society forces them to be dependent on men and trapped in abusive relationships. It is the women of this country who are likely to be raped every 3 hours because they live amongst predators in their homes and their workplace. It is the women of this country who are subjected to the forced sterilization because this government wants to control which women are allowed to have children on the basis of their HIV status. It is the police of this country who subject victims to secondary harassment, ridicule, and instruct victims to resolve abuse as a family matter. Women in South Africa may as well be subjected to the past laws of the apartheid regime because they cannot walk freely in taxi ranks without being harassed. They cannot be out at night without a fear of being kidnapped in the form of permanent harassment and making them live in fear in the land of their birth. Our traditional institutions have assumed the role of the fascist and sexist apartheid regime by denying women the right to own land in the rural areas. Our economic sector has subjected the women of South Africa to separate development by designing an employment sector with significant wage gap between men and women. Most recently, we have seen the abuse of those who are faced with the triple oppression of race, class, and gender. When young girls who took sanitary towels and grandmothers who took food for their grandchildren were arrested by a regime that has deserted women. We are a nation that has abandoned its fiercest liberators and have become oppressors of women, whom we thought we would not have liberation to speak of today. Comrades and fellow combatants, women who in our history have been the workers of the land remain on the outskirts of the land ownership and in some instances because of backward views of black society. The relationship women have with the land is determined by male chiefs, rulers, and their husbands, and in many communities, women only have access to the land if they are married and through mediation by their husbands. The landlessness of our people in general is worse when one considers women. This is a shameful realization when one considers that it is the likes of Mantatis, Queen Nzinga, and Queen Nandi who led glorious battles against colonialism and built dynasties on this very land. The liberation of women rests on the return of the land. There is no liberation for women if they cannot produce their own food, if they cannot have their own homes, if they cannot decide to establish business on their own land. Women must fight for their rightful place in the land discourse of South Africa. We must oppose cultural practices that abuse, mutilate, and oppress women because they have no place in a democratic society. The ground forces of our glorious movement and fellow fighters, women in South Africa occupy critical industries both in the formal and informal sector. But because it is men who determine the hierarchy of which occupations matter, women remain at the bottom of the labor production food chain. Industries dominated by women such as food production, the textile and clothing industry, nursing and teaching are critical to the sustenance of society. But women in these sectors are extremely exploited and underpaid. Men generally earn more than twice as women in South Africa across all sectors, even though they may be in the same field of work. The gender wage gap only emphasizes the fact that women are not valued in this country. Comrades, women in South Africa are the most productive yet invisible laborers. The very fabric of capitalist society is maintained by forces that no small-minded capitalist ever considers. The laborers who are the theorized about the most and have historically been identified as the motive force of the working class, miners, security guards, construction workers, return to homes and to an economy that has no legislation and to a worker that belongs to no union. And that worker is called a woman. These are women who perform reproductive labor. Reproductive labor speaks to the labor that is invisible but necessary for production in the outside world. Women are unable to participate in the formal economy, are compensated less because they are not viewed as productive forces because they are able to get pregnant or have periods. It is just on the basis of periods and pregnancy that you discriminate a fellow human being. This is a mediocre that should never be celebrated and tolerated in our democracy. These stereotypes maintain women in subjugated position while they do labor which has historically been designated to women. Even though half of South African population is women, in reality, the labor absorption rate for women is only 37%, while 48% of working age men are employed. These are the structural realities we must change if we ever wish to elevate women from the position of subhumanity they are subjected to today. Fellow fighters, it is because of these realities in our economy and social life that gender-based violence thrives in our society. The attitude that women are worth less than men, the position of women in our cultures and religions, and the place women occupy in our economy is a motivating factor for the brutality and violence they are subjected to. Gender-based violence in its most brutal form refers to violence against women at an intimate level. But this violence is based on how women are regarded by society. We must fight against corrective rape of women. We must fight against intimate partner violence, against the physical and emotional abuse of women, and with the same energy, we must fight against the economic and cultural exploitation of women, because it is this form of gender-based violence that makes its most gruesome nature possible. Banyana earning less than Bafana just because they are women, it's a form of gender-based violence. Women being denied land rights, being paid less than men, and being treated unfairly or as irrational because of their periods or pregnancy is a form of gender-based violence. The fact that women have lesser stake in the CIC, are less represented in the corporate sector, is gender-based violence. And the reality that the judiciary is dominated by men is the reason why women are subjected to secondary victimization in the courts by lawyers and judges who are not sensitive to matters of gender-based violence. We must commend the EFF Gender-Based Violence Desk, which was formed on this day last year at the grave of struggle stalwart Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela. It has indeed fulfilled its promise to her by being at the forefront of women's struggles and defending women across victimization by individuals, the corporate sector, and the state. However, a lot of work is yet to be done to ensure that true women emancipation is achieved and the road of gender-based violence is defeated. As a point of departure, we must develop practical methods of fighting gender-based violence at a social, legislative, and judicial level. We must propose the following as a guide to permanently protecting and uplifting women in our society. We must ensure that there is 50% women representation in all spheres representing economic benefit, political participation, and managerial and leadership responsibility. If we want to end the oppression of women, we must ensure that there is compulsory gender education and training for all at school, work, within the family, church, in the legislative, executive, as well as in civil society. The secondary victimization of victims of gender-based violence is why a majority of cases remain unreported. To cap this, there must be education of the police on the gender justice and the establishment of specialized law enforcement units to deal with women-related crimes. Fighters, it is not enough to change laws to fight the exclusion and exploitation of women. We must change the values in our society that makes us think that women are lesser beings. In order to do this, we must engage custodians of our tradition, faith leaders, and other cultural practitioners to collectively find means to combat the oppression of women and undo backward beliefs that perpetuate the abuse of women. At the level of the law, we must introduce a special inspectorate in the Department of Labor to monitor, report on, and enforce gender equality in the workplace. Such measures will range from heavy penalties to the withdrawal of trading licenses in the case of repeat offenders of women exploitation. Sexual harassment is rife in the corporate sector, and as a result, we must establish a dependable and safe whistleblowing mechanism for reporting all instances of sexual harassment, job for sex, and gender-based violence in the workplace, in municipalities, and in government. Fellow combatant, we must be able to recognize that women are not skilled as a result of deliberate separate development and contribute to the economy in ways that cannot be measured. Because of this, we must initiate a comprehensive project aimed at recognition of work performed by women in the household as informal labor, which contributes to the national economy, GDP, and the formal tax system. Our primary schools and high schools continue to hire individuals who have been identified as perpetual predators of children, despite the basic economic department having a database of those who have been convicted. We must therefore institute a process to publicize the sex offenders list for the public to be able to access in order to be vigilant of who gets hired in our schools. Further to this, gender-based violence and sexual crimes cases must be made Schedule 5 offenses that are mostly likely to not receive bail in court in order to protect communities and victims from intimidation and further abuse. We must create an IPID division that solely focuses on complaints against police who do not allow victims to open cases pertaining to GBV, and police who are complicit and or alleged to be perpetrators of crimes against women, children, and gender-based violence crimes. We must ensure that part and parcel of the curriculum used for the training of police is on gender justice, the nuances of gender-based violence, and an evolving curriculum that is constantly updated to address the multi-sectoral growth around gender justice. SAPS members should be trained on the Criminal Procedure Act 51 of 1977 and other legislation that deal with violence against women to be well versed on ways to deal with offenders of cases of violence against women. We must make accessible to the public a routinely updated database of police officials and police stations which have been found to have violated victims of gender-based violence and sexual crimes. Further to this, we must institute immediate suspension of police officers and officials who are alleged to have committed crimes of violence against women and children pending the outcome of the cases in the court of law. The provision of evidence kits must be regulated via a national system that is able to track down the supply, demand, and provision to public via electronic system. To ensure public participation and awareness, the courts, SAPS, and the NPA must use community media, public meetings, platforms for direct communication as a standard monthly procedure for all its GBV education and information sharing programs, prioritizing mother tongue instructions. The EFF Gender-Based Violence Desk must embark on a program to ensure that all judges from the magistrate court, district courts, regional courts, including labor courts, maintenance courts, sexual offense courts, the commercial crimes court, Judicial Service Commission, the High Court, Supreme Court of Appeal, including Constitutional Court justices as well, retired judges and justices are trained and retrained through annual refresher courses to equip them to deal effectively with gender-sensitive cases. These include cases related to sexual violence, sexual harassment, domestic violence, child rapes, rape in general, gender-based and women-targeted murderers, including all violence against people living with disability too. Further, that the above training include training for legislature, prosecutors, and general personnel working at the environment of the targeted groups to be trained as an overall aim to address the social ills that fuel gender-based violence and sexual crimes against women, children, LGBTQI+ communities. The EFF Gender-Based Violence Desk must aggressively engage in public awareness and communication strategies and training interventions, all aimed at or directed towards positively changing social norms which declare LGBTQI+ sexual preference as abnormal. The EFF will enter a process to amend the Criminal Law Amendment Act and existing legislation to include harsher minimum sentences for corrective rape specifically, or crimes committed with hatred as motivation in general. The EFF Gender-Based Violence Desk must undergo a community-targeted program to abolish forced marriages in totality, and particularly those of minor girls as young as 12. These marriages are a violation of children's rights, human dignity, freedom, and security of the person, and should therefore be a punishable offense under kidnapping, sexual assault, and human trafficking. Ukuthwala must come to an end, and all cultural and traditional practices that have no place in our democratic society must be rejected by all, including traditional leaders. We call on Contra Lesa to lead the charge against ukuthwala and all traditional and cultural practices that are not favorable to women and young girls. To avoid the tragedy of forced sterilization done by the South African Health Department, we must ensure that there is public access to female-specific healthcare and sexual reproductive healthcare in accordance to the standards of universal healthcare coverage. The EFF will ensure that the state provides free sanitary towels and alternative sanitary material for menstruation for women and girls, and this must be passed through an act of parliament. It is only through this directed intervention that will defeat the scourge of patriarchy and put an end to the lip service paid to the struggle of women in our country. We must achieve this objective in memory of the 1956 generation in order to ensure that the women of the country and the continent are truly free in the land of their birth, and that being a woman is not a sign of being a less human being. We must ensure, fellow fighters, that all those who perpetuate crimes against women are discriminated. A fighter cannot be a woman abuser. A fighter cannot be a person who perpetuates rape against women. A fighter is a responsible human being who ensures that we fight crime that are perpetuated against women. Fighters will have a responsibility to ensure that indeed women feel free in South Africa. Anything that threatens the security of women cannot be associated with the struggle for economic emancipation. We must fight all those who forcefully accuse other people of doing wrong things, including accusing people of rape. Because those who forcefully and intentionally lie about rape, They undermine our struggle to fight against the real victims and perpetrators of rape. We must fight the perpetrators of rape. But lying about rape and lying about gender-based violence directly undermines the work that our women are doing in fighting the real rape. We must not subject our people to kangaroo courts. We must ensure that we transform the courts to listen and convict and sentence to life those who have committed crimes against our women. We must do so because we believe in our Constitution and its superiority, and we believe in our courts. No other method must be developed which can be used for political expediency to judge people who are amongst those who are falsely accused. We must know that there are certain people who will want to use this genuine struggle of JBV and rape to do their own things which are not in line with what we want to achieve. Let's have confidence in the rule of law and the superiority of our Constitution, and those cleared of any wrongdoing by the laws of our country should be reintegrated back into society. We should not continue to subject them to attacks even when they have been cleared by legitimate, acceptable processes that include the courts of law. Fighters, let's reclaim the streets. Let's occupy the streets. Let's make sure that the streets belong to the women of South Africa. The streets of South Africa do not belong to criminals, do not belong to rapists, do not belong to perpetrators. The streets of South Africa belong to the women of South Africa. They must walk freely at any time they wish to do so. No one must not feel safe in their own country, in their own land. And we know that with strong branches of the EFF, the streets of South Africa will be safe and the women of South Africa will be safe. I salute all women who are leading the charge for the economic emancipation. I salute them because they are brave. They are not scared to be isolated by the status quo. I salute you because you are leading from the front. Like Madinoche, the Tsweri Tipaka Bagaleng, you are not scared to lead the charge against the most powerful establishment. Women of the EFF are a special breed. They are the kind of women who take no nonsense from anyone. They do not pretend. They fight and they speak truth to power. Women of the EFF, be like Winnie Mandela. Do not be scared, because only the truth will liberate you. Only the truth will break the chains of oppression against women. Women of the EFF, continue to lead us. We are right behind you because we have full confidence in your leadership and your leadership style. Thank you very much.
Mutu wa monana, aye moye tapili. Mutu wa monana, aye moye tapili. Mutu wa monana.